Hey everybody, Christina here from Copictopia. I know that these are not Copics, but they are Stampin Blends. A friend of mine who's a Stampin Up demonstrator sent them to me and wanted me to do a little bit of a review with them to see if they were anything like Copics or if I would like them in place of Copics. I also have another gal that's in my classes for Copic Academy that wanted me to see if I could use them with the same techniques that I use for Copics. So I had recorded this once before, but I'm doing a voiceover now because I forgot to turn the volume down. So if I'm a little off, I'm really sorry. But I have different colors of all of them. This is the Stampin Up colorless blender, as Copic would call it, but Stampin Up actually got it right and calls it the color lifter. So I'm super excited because that's exactly what these markers do, is they lift the color or they push the color away. So yay Stampin Up for getting the name right on that one. And it also does the same as the Copic one as well. The blender will push or lift the color instead of just blending it. So I have 4 different families of colors here. I have the Mossy Meadow colors, I have the dark and the light, and I also have the Old Olive colors, which are both dark and light, and I have the Calypso Coral colors, dark and light, and then I also have the Petal Pink colors, dark and light. So some of these blend really well together, and some of them do a little bit better than others. They don't have many variances as they do the Copic colors, and what I mean by that is between the two colors, I have, like say these ones, the Old Olives, I have 5 different colors so that I have a wide range of color instead of just light and dark. So I can get those shadows, I can get those high tones and those low tones rather than just light or dark. So you can actually get the colors a little bit like that, and you can do that by using both of the Mossy Mellow and the Old Olive together. And I've done this swatch sheet. So this one is Mossy Meadow, this one is Old Olive, this is the Calypso Coral and the Pink Petal. You can see that there are some that are really dark and really light against each other. So the pink petal and the Calypso Coral work real well together, and that's the dark petal pink, and this one is the light. So you can see that they actually they blend real nice together, they don't really drown each other out. And now this one is the dark Calypso Coral, and this one is the light Calypso Coral. And if you look closely, when I blend it out, which means pushing from the dark color and trying to pull the dark color out, the dark color doesn't pull out, it just kind of stays there and the light fills it in. Now the way they make the ink is with the clear blending ink, and then they just add the dye ink to it. And so these pens let out a lot of ink when you're coloring. And so I think the light colors have a lot more of the colorless lifter or the color lifter in them. They don't really work when you go from light to dark. It's kind of, you have to go dark to light. And if you go the other way and you pull it in to the dark color, then it works a lot better and you don't get it, the muted ickiness of the way I did it the first time, which is pulling it out. And you can go over it again, but it just kind of really muddles that dark color. So now here is my old olive, or not my old olive, but my Copic. That's the YG 95 or 97. And then here's the YG 91. You can tell that it doesn't work really well, just those two, because I didn't follow and do the YG 93. So here's the YG 95 again, and here is the YG 93. And then here is the YG 91 next. And you can see how they really just kind of blend all together, and that YG 91 gets rid of the lines. But you can't really do that with the Stampin' Blends. Now you can do this technique where you pull the lighter color into the dark color, just like I did with the Calypso Coral, and that seems to work just fine even with a Copic. So that is one Copic technique that you can use with the Stampin' Blends. And because of the light dark colors with no color in between, I definitely recommend doing the pulling the light into the dark instead of trying to pull the dark out. So these markers, this is the Mossy Mellow Dark and the Old Olives. So these ones, you can tell, if you put them in order, you can get a little bit of a variation like I have with my Copic markers. You can't do that with the pink ones because the Petal Pink and the Calypso Coral are just so far away from each other. But if you use, this one is going to be, this is the dark of the Mossy Meadow. I keep saying mellow, but it's meadow. And then this one is the dark Old Olive that I'm pulling out now. And then you can use the light of the Mossy Meadow of the Stampin' Blends. And that one's a little bit darker, but not much. You can still see a little bit of a difference. And then this is the light Old Olive. And that one I'm going to pull in instead of pull the dark colors out. I'm pulling the light color in. And that's when you get the blending part of it. But it does kind of muddle it just because these do let out a lot of ink. So these ones, now I'm going to do just the two together, and this is the dark of the Mossy Meadow, and this is the light of the Mossy Meadow. So you can still see those lines in there, and they don't blend out very well unless you continue to keep blending and blending and blending, but then you're going to get that muddled look and the over blending look that just doesn't do your project justice. So now here are the Old Olives, if I can find them. Here is the dark, and then here is the light. Here we go. And that one you have to pull in because you can see there is such a huge difference between the two colors. But as long as you pull it in to the dark color and you don't try to pull that dark color out, it's fine. So now I stamped these Cata Lilies. These are from Rubbernecker Stamps, and I stamped I colored them in with Petal Pink, the dark and the light, the very first ones. And these pens do really well with bigger images because they do put out a lot of ink. So I went ahead and I colored in the darker spaces with the dark Petal Pink first. And now I'm going to move on to the light of the Petal Pink. And you can see I don't have to be really careful or anything like that because this is a bigger image. And I can go back in and do it again if I want to because the image is big enough to handle that ink flow. So here I'm going to show you, if I just tap, and I'm doing this very, very lightly, I mean just the lightest I possibly can, there is a lot of ink. And I did that from the side, and then that is from the top of the nib of the pen. And the ink just comes out and bleeds out. And now if I do that with the Copic marker, that's the tip. And there's the tip, and then here is the side. And you get exactly what you put down. It doesn't bleed out, it doesn't leak. And I don't know if that's because my markers are just super juicy or what happens with them, but they really, you have to know your product. I think that these will really work as long as you know your product and what you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the leaves now with the Cata-Lily, and I'm using the Old Olive because it is the lighter of the two color families, and I don't want the leaves to be super dark. So I'm trying to do this where I'm just getting the dark parts that are already shaded in for me, and I'm just going around and I'm trying to be as gentle as absolutely possible. Because for those who know me, they know I like my thin flicks. And for me, it is really hard to do thin flicks with these markers because of all the ink that is released the moment that nib touches. Now here is a thin flick with the Copic marker and how thin those are. So again, I think that it can be done just as, I think the flicks can be done with the Stampin Blends just the same way as it can with a Copic. You just have to know your product and know what you're working with. So now I'm going over this with the light olive, and I'm just coloring it in as I would normally, and I'm just going over everything in the leaf. And this is exactly how I would do it with Copics, but I would be a little bit more careful with it. And this is really making the darker color just kind of fade away. So I'm going to go over it again with my dark Old Olive, just as I would with a Copic, and I'm putting all the shadows in there where I would think that they would be for this leaf. So there is the leaf with the Stampin Blends, and I'm just finishing that out and trying to blend those dark lines out. But again, the lines don't really blend. They more just get saturated with a lighter color. So here is another image. This is the Daisies from Rubbernecker as well. I love this image. It's super, super pretty, and it's great for all kinds of cards. I'm actually going to start with my YG97, and I'm going to do the first set of leaves with the Copic markers. Now this is a smaller image, so I'm going a little bit slower. I'm really taking my time, and I'm going over the same spots with YG97 that I would do with the darkest of the dark Old Olive Stampin Blends. And I'm just trying to get all the little spots, and this one is going to take a little bit more time because I don't have as much ink coming out, and I can get that extra detail because I don't have the extra ink coming out. So after this, I'm going to go to my YG95. Oops, I used the wrong pen. Okay, YG95 now. And I'm just going to go over the tops of the leaves. And I'm doing this, and I'm just, not the whole top of the leaf, just the top of the YG97. Sorry about that. So I'm just going over, and I'm actually pulling out that darker color to make that darker color spread out a little bit, but I'm not losing the shadows and things that I put in there in the first place. Now I'm going to use YG93, and I'm going to do the same thing. I could actually finish the leaf out. Since it's such a small leaf, you really don't need a lot of colors. But I'm going to go ahead and just go over all the dark spots and bring those out so I can have a little bit more color and a little bit more shadow and maybe a little bit of texture. So I'm almost done with this part, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to use the YG91. And I'm just going to finish out the rest of the leaf with the YG91. Now I probably could have just finished it off with the YG93 because this YG91 is kind of making my leaves look a little bit dead or dried out. And I like my leaves to be very bright and vibrant. So I could have just finished it off with the 93, but hey, why not show you the 91 while I'm using it? So now I'm going to do the other leaves, and I'm going to use the olive. And this I'm going to start with the dark old olive if I can find it. And I'm just going to use the same technique that I did with the Copic markers. I'm starting out with the dark, and I'm trying to use as thin lines as absolutely possible so they don't just overtake the entire image. And I'm trying to just color in the dark highlighted parts that are already there and given by the artist who made the stamp and the image for the stamp. So I went ahead and finished this out, and this is like using the YG97 or the 95. And I'm just slowly pulling that out. Another reason that I might not be doing as well is because I'm not used to the image, or the ink, not the image, the ink coming out so quickly with my marker. So I'm done with that one. Now I'm going to be using, I keep trying to set the cap up, but now I'm going to be using the light old olive. Whenever I'm coloring, I usually set my caps up so everyone can see the color that I'm using. But this time it doesn't seem to really be working. So now, see, this is what I'm doing. I'm actually pulling the colors out instead of in this time because I'm not doing a big space. I'm doing a very small space. So I'm just finishing up these leaves and getting them done. And actually, if I look closely at them, it's almost as if it gives off a more of a watercolored look than a blended marker look, which is actually probably an advantage because I know a lot of people like the Zig markers and the Karen markers for that watercolored look, but it's really starting to look as if I'm achieving it with just using these Stampin' Up markers. So that's actually kind of really cool. So as I'm finishing this up, I went back to the dark because my dark old olive got really washed out and you couldn't see any of the shadows or any of the darker lines that I wanted to see. So those are the leaves, and that's what they are really bright and bold, but they really do look more watercolored than anything else, which I like the watercolored look, so that might just actually work for these pens. Now I'm using the Calypso Coral, the dark one, and I'm just going to put in some dark lines on the daisy part of this flower. And I know I'm not going to color this daisy properly, but this is just so that we can see how they work, the markers. And so now we are just pulling all of these out, and I'm just going to go around to each petal, and I'm trying to get those really thin lines because the lines on the petals are small and the petals are really small. So I kind of want to keep that as much detail as I can. Now I'm going to use the light Calypso Coral, and I'm going to try and pull that darkness out so that it kind of covers the whole leaf, but that isn't what seems to be happening. What seems to be happening is I'm just diluting it with the other marker, and it's just staying light while the dark marker, the dark Calypso Coral, gets covered up. And so I would have to go back in with my dark again because it's not pulling and blending out that color. It's just covering over it like you would a watercolor. So now I'm going to go ahead and use the darkest of the pink petal, or the petal pink. And I'm just using that inward, like I'm pulling it in to the darker colors. And you can get some of a color change when you mix the two markers, which is really kind of cool because you can do that with Copic markers too. So you can use the Copic marker techniques with the Stampin Blends. You just really need to know what you're coloring. So you have to look at your image and know what you're coloring, and you really need to know what your product is. Now I'm going in and I'm redoing those dark lines because they just got muted instead of being pulled out. And I really want them to stand out a little bit more so it looks more crisp. So I hope this will encourage you that if you are a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, we can figure out Copic techniques to help you use these markers and make your images look beautiful. I really think that these are great markers, and I will probably continue to use them, but I will continue to use them as a watercolor type marker for a watercolor look instead of the marker look that I tend to get from a Copic marker. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a review, a little bit of a comparison, and a little bit of will Copic marker techniques work with your Stampin' Blends. I really think that they will. I hope you have a great day. Bye.